Nikola Motors and its founder, Trevor Milton, have just been issued subpoenas by the SEC and the US Department of Justice in relation to the fraudulent allegations made against them. They've also just released their Q3 financials, and both of these are exactly what I'm going to be covering today. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. In this video I'm obviously going to be giving my accountant's review of Nikola Motors and also talking about what it means to be issued a subpoena by the SEC and what they typically contain and why it's not really looking that great for Nikola Motors. Only around 3% of you are actually subscribed to the channel, which is really low. So if you enjoy this video, then be sure to subscribe. It's free and you can always unsubscribe later if you want. Now let's get into the video. Also, please remember that everything I say in this video is just my opinion. I don't work for Nikola Motors, nor do the accounting for them. I'm just giving my opinion as an accountant on their financial statements, which are available publicly. I'm just kind of talking about and giving my thoughts on publicly available information. So, Nikola Motors released their Q3 financials on Monday, November 9th. They also announced in their webcast that they've received subpoenas from the SEC and the US Department of Justice back in September, shortly after the release of the Hindenburg Research paper. It's also disclosed here in their Q3 results. This basically means that the US Department of Justice and the SEC have asked to see pretty much all of the information that Nikola Motors and Trevor Milton have. Their email records, their accounting information, invoices, plans, you name it, the US Department of Justice and the SEC want to see it. Therefore, the SEC and the DOJ obviously think that there must be some form of truth in those allegations made in the Hindenburg Research paper. If you don't know about those allegations, then be sure to watch this video just up here after you finish this one, of course. The SEC and the DOJ are two very large and two very busy organisations. They don't just investigate people after one little accusation or for the fun of it. They regularly investigate larger organisations like banks and often issue fines that reach well into the billions. The SEC has previously issued fines of over $4 billion to BP for the Deepwater oil spill that happened in 2010. They've also issued fines of over $9 billion to the big banks for illegal foreclosures during the 2008 recession. And they even issued a fine of over $13 billion for JP Morgan Chase for the sale of illegal and not very reliable mortgage products. So therefore, while you can see that the accusations made in the Hindenburg Research paper are just accusations, the SEC and the DOJ wouldn't be wasting their time if they didn't think that there could be some form of truth in those accusations. It'll be really interesting to see what comes as a result of the investigation, and I'll be sure to keep you all up to date. Now on to the Q3 financials. How are they looking? And from a quick overview, not great. The loss has increased massively since this time last year, and even increased pretty massively since Q2, which is a bit concerning. So let's dive right in, shall we? So far, revenue is down pretty heavily at Nikola, falling from around 433k for the first 3 quarters of 2019 to around 100k for the first 3 quarters of 2020, with a whopping $0 of sales coming from the last 3 months. Now I suppose this is mainly because Nikola is moving away from the provision of solar energy and into the distribution of alternatively fuelled vehicles, namely trucks, but obviously they haven't finished researching and building those vehicles yet, so can't really make any sales. The research and development and general expenditure has increased massively to around $236 million for the first 9 months of 2020, with around $117 million in these last 3 months alone. Comparing that to the whole of 2019, they only incurred around $60 million worth of research costs. Now this is somewhat concerning, but not too concerning in a way. Let me explain. So far you might recognise that Nikola seems to be performing pretty similarly to Dan Bilzerian's business, Ignite International. It's obviously incurring massive expenditures and not generating much revenue. Therefore the company is obviously losing a lot of money and digging itself into a massive hole of losses. But when the research and development is finished and the trucks are all built, they can usually recuperate these losses by making massive amounts of sales. That's I guess where the business is going to differ maybe to Dan Bilzerian's business, because obviously Dan's business has finished the research and development of its products and is selling them, but is still getting further into debt. Tesla, for example, started off being pretty heavily loss-making and has only recently entered the realm of profitability. But over the next few years, it's going to continue making sales of arguably what are some of the best performing electric vehicles on the market right now. This means that going forward, Tesla's obviously going to be generating bigger and bigger profits and recuperate all of those losses that it made in the first 8 years of its lifetime. Nikola Motors is obviously hoping to go down a similar path. Although, based on those accusations made in the Hindenburg Research paper about how basically Nikola has made absolutely zero progress towards researching and building alternatively fuelled vehicles, and how it's basically just a giant hoax to influence the value of the stock, maybe Nikola Motors won't be following exactly in Tesla's footsteps. If you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to drop a like down below, as this really helps out my channel. Also, consider becoming a member of the channel and clicking the join button down below as well. Looking at the balance sheet and comparing it to the second quarter of 2020, Nikola now has around $910 million compared to around $700 million, which is obviously good. It's good that they've managed to increase their cash massively, but it's obviously not been as a result of huge amounts of sales. Investors have pumped around $300 million into Nikola. Looking at the remainder of the balance sheet, the rest of the assets are fairly lackluster, but I guess you'd probably expect that from a company that doesn't really make many sales. Looking at the liability section, obviously they've got a lot of accounts payable and accrued expenses, but again, you'd expect this from a company that's burning through cash and doing a lot of research and development. We can also see that the customer deposits increased by around $2 million in the third quarter, from around $4.9 million to $6.9 million. So obviously there must be some customers out there that are very interested in the Nikola trucks, if they're ever finished. We can then see down there at the bottom that the shareholders' capital has increased from around $1.2 billion in the second quarter to around $1.5 billion in the third quarter, which is that additional $300 million of capital that the shareholders have pumped in. But their accumulated deficit of losses is very large, around $400 million. Now obviously Nikola are hoping to someday make that all up with their massive sales and become a massively profitable business. One day in the future, I guess. Now really interestingly, we can see that there's around $91 million of stock-based compensation. So obviously somebody's getting a massive payday. Now again, if we scroll down to the stock-based compensation note, we can see that actually Nikola Motors entered into a separation agreement with Trevor Milton. As part of this agreement, they paid him around $16.5 million in stocks in quarter 3 alone, and there's still around $111 million worth of stocks to pay to Trevor Milton. So evidently he did very well out of the separation. Something also really interesting here is the $5 million they've already incurred in legal advisory fees as a result of the Hindenburg Research paper and the SEC and DOJ investigations. So evidently I guess they've gone to town with the lawyers. Obviously lawyers are very expensive, but to spend around $5 million in what? A month or two? Maybe shows that they're in some deep trouble and are trying to get the best advice to either scoot around the problem or reduce the impact. I also found this down in the related parties note, where Nikola Motors has entered into an agreement with Trevor Milton to reimburse him for the use of his private jet, which must be really nice for Trevor to have his own private jet, but it's obviously a tad unusual for a company that's centred around the use of alternative fuels, because obviously private jets emit quite a lot of pollution. But at least it gives Trevor a really good escape plan and he can take off if this all goes south. Get it? Something else that's really interesting is this paragraph right here. In November, members of our board of directors and executives agreed to extend the lock-up period on around 136 million shares of stock until April 2021. This clearly shows that the executives are somewhat serious about the success of Nikola Motors because they're willing to lock up their shares for an extended period of time rather than just cashing out as soon as they can and letting the company flop. But I guess they obviously kind of had to do this from a PR perspective because obviously as a result of the Hindenburg Research paper, a lot of investors would have been really nervous about the future success of Nikola Motors and potentially would have pulled out all of their money. So all in all, what do I think of Nikola Motors? Well, they've obviously got massive expenses and they're burning through cash. But fortunately for Nikola, the investors are there and they're actually gaining cash overall. Now this would be somewhat concerning, but considering Nikola Motors are a groundbreaking, alternatively fuelled vehicle company, they obviously could produce a vehicle that, is completely revolutionary and they make all of their money back and a whole lot more. Whether this is actually going to happen or not though, is a different question. Obviously the Hindenburg Research paper alleges that Nikola basically have no idea what they're doing and have not researched an alternatively fuelled vehicle and haven't really developed one either. Nikola is also shelling out quite a lot in legal fees, so maybe they see quite a big legal battle coming. but the fact that the executives have actually extended their lock-up period of the shares shows that they are actually quite committed to Nikola and do want it to succeed and do want to develop these trucks and sell them and generate all this money. Either that, or maybe they're just going to try and stall and delay the development of these alternatively powered vehicles until the end of the lock-up period and then dash off with all the cash. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. As always guys, if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to check out some of my others. Alternatively, subscribe to the channel and ding the notification bell, because that way you'll be alerted when I upload a new video. Cheers!